All right, let's get right into this explainer. Today, we're exploring the extreme life or death realities of elite combat, and we're going to connect them directly to the massive, macro-level geopolitical strategies that actually put soldiers on the battlefield in the first place. It's a really fascinating, serious journey that bridges the intensely personal, gritty experience of a firefight with those high-stakes, calculated decisions made in the war room. We're going to break down exactly what creates an elite warrior, the intense reality of the Iraq War on the ground, and the fierce academic debate over why the United States really chooses to intervene in foreign conflicts. I've been shot at before, but never like that. I thought my arm had been shot off. We're starting our journey with this raw, visceral memory from retired U.S. Navy SEAL Lieutenant Jason Redman. It's a sobering reminder that behind every sweeping geopolitical strategy, there are actual individuals on the ground facing terrifying, chaotic odds. Because to truly understand the grand strategy of war, we first have to understand the mind of the warrior who's tasked with executing it.
So let's start with Act 1, the Forge.
How do you actually build a human being capable of operating effectively when the world is literally exploding around them? Physical strength simply isn't enough. People who are unbelievably physically fit wash out of SEAL training all the time. Surviving the Forge's special operations requires a completely unique mental capacity. You have to be able to endure staggering levels of pain and discomfort for long periods of time, but even more importantly, you have to be able to compartmentalize chaos. When everyone else shuts down out of paralyzing fear, an elite operator has to be able to process complex information and execute decisions instantly. And the military filters for these exact traits through the agonizing progression of Hell Week. It kicks off with Breakout, which simulates the deafening chaos of combat using relentless explosions and gunfire. By day 3, students are facing surf torture. They lock arms in 50 to 60-degree ocean water, waves crashing over their heads until they are borderline hypothermic. And through all of this, they're carrying rubber boats filled with sand, weighing up to 400 pounds on their heads, covering an estimated 200 miles with that crushing weight. By days 4 and 5, the physical toll is so absolute that the mind literally fractures. Students start hallucinating. Imagine seeing perfectly formed white picket fences rising right out of the crashing ocean, or experiencing microsleeps where you are actually falling asleep while running down the beach.
And here's the absolute kicker. All of that extreme physical exertion happens on just 3 hours. 3! That is the total number of hours of sleep an average student gets during the entire grueling duration of Hell Week. It's pure, manufactured adversity, designed to strip away absolutely everything but a candidate's core determination. Which brings us to Act 2, surviving the ambush.
So how does a person who just survived Hell Week handle a real-world ambush? Well, they rely on a core tactical concept called violence of action. This means responding to a sudden threat with a massive, concentrated flurry of firepower and targeted shooting to absolutely overwhelm the opponent. By relentlessly training for this in highly simulated, terrifying environments, where instructors do everything in their power to recreate the sheer panic of war, SEALs ensure that their accuracy and decision-making hardly degrade at all when real bullets start flying. They are actively training their minds to accept the chaos as completely normal. And that specific training was put to the ultimate test on September 13, 2007, just outside of Fallujah, Iraq. During a nighttime special ops mission, Jason Redman's assault team walked right into a brutal enemy ambush in an abandoned dirt field. The night just erupted. Acting as the assault force commander, Redman was struck by heavy machine gun fire. He took 2 rounds in the left elbow and was then shot directly in the right side of his face. The bullet entered his jaw and exited through his nose. In total, he was hit 7 times. He's pinned down in the dirt, bleeding profusely, having lost nearly 40% of his entire blood volume. And in that moment, Redman focused on a single primal mantra: stay awake to stay alive. He refused to give al-Qaeda the victory of killing a special operations officer. He fought through this overwhelming physiological urge to just close his eyes and drift off. And meanwhile, to survive the withering enemy fire, his heavily outgunned team executed the closest danger-close bomb drop of the entire Iraq War. They called it a massive airstrike right on top of their own position. The sheer resilience required to survive that kind of nightmare is just staggering. It's an incredibly stark reminder of the profound reality of these events, the deep human cost, the lasting trauma, and the ultimate sacrifice borne by these operators is immense. They risk absolutely everything, their bodies and their minds in these combat zones. But looking at the sheer scale of this sacrifice naturally leads us to a much broader, highly debated geopolitical question. Why was the United States there in the first place?
This question pivots us from the intense, micro-level reality of a bloody firefight in Fallujah directly to the macro-level war room in Washington, D.C. What were the overarching strategic reasons behind this military intervention?
Let's unpack that in Act 3, the geopolitical why.
To truly understand the strategic debate, we have to look neutrally at the evidence. There are two primary schools of thought that foreign policy experts use to explain the U.S. invasion of Iraq. On one side, we have the security school, which argues the war was a defensive measure born out of genuine fear and perceived vulnerability. And on the other side, we have the hegemony school, which views the war as a conscious, calculated choice to project massive power and maintain global dominance. Let's break both of these down impartially. The crucial point of the security perspective is that the 9/11 attacks completely revolutionized the risk calculus for U.S. leadership. Scholars in this camp argue that officials genuinely felt an extraordinary vulnerability. Suddenly, they could no longer tolerate states that might be pursuing weapons of mass destruction. In this transformed landscape, Iraq was viewed as a highly dangerous nexus, basically the ultimate nightmare scenario where a hostile government could covertly hand off catastrophic weapons to stateless terrorist networks. Plus, this perspective notes that Saddam Hussein's years of aggressively obstructing weapons inspectors created a very reasonable, even if historically incorrect, impression that he was actively hiding a growing threat. So for this school of thought, the primary motive was genuinely to safeguard American lives from another devastating attack.
On the flip side, we have the hegemony perspective. Scholars in this realist camp argue that the intervention was a conscious expression of unchecked global power. They suggest that 9/11 deeply threatened the United States' reputation for unassailable dominance, and this required what academics call a performative war to reestablish generalized deterrence, essentially executing a massive display of force to intimidate any future global challengers. In this strategic view, Iraq was chosen not because it was an imminent threat, but because it was weak, isolated, and a really convenient foe to comprehensively demonstrate U.S. military might. From this angle, security concerns regarding WMDs were largely a public pretext used to justify a war that was truly designed to perpetuate American global primacy.
And that takes us right back down to the individual level in Act 4, getting off the X. Because while historians and politicians continue to debate that macro-level why, the individual soldiers are living the painful micro-level aftermath. Just 96 hours after nearly bleeding to death in that dirt field in Iraq, Redmond arrived at Bethesda in Maryland, waking up with his mouth literally wired shut, forcing him to communicate only by writing painfully on a notepad. The initial relief of surviving quickly vanished. Facing years of excruciating facial reconstruction, and with doctors openly contemplating amputating his paralyzed arm, Redmond realized a terrifying truth. He had simply stepped out of one violent ambush directly into another.
But this horrific reality forged an absolutely incredible life philosophy. In SEAL combat training, the X is the specific point of an ambush. The golden rule is that if you find yourself on the X, you must move. You have to get off it immediately, because the longer you sit there, the deadlier it becomes. Lying battered in that hospital bed, Redmond realized this military survival tactic applies perfectly to everyday life. We all eventually face devastating personal, medical, or professional ambush. He recognized that if you get stuck like quicksand on the X in life, you inevitably fall into three very dangerous traps of the victim mentality. First, you look backward, mourning what you've lost and wasting precious energy on what-ifs. Second, you look forward with deep, hollow bitterness about the life you quote-unquote were supposed to have. And third, you look outward, desperately searching for someone or something to blame for your pain. Staying on the X destroys you from the inside out just as surely as enemy fire. To survive, you have to actively choose to push forward. You have to get off the X. Redmond famously hung a bright orange sign on his hospital door to explicitly banish pity and demand positive energy from anyone entering his room. He created a brand new purpose for his recovery. So I want to leave you with this final, powerful question. When life inevitably ambushes you and you find yourself pinned down in the dark, what is the personal mission statement that will pull you off the X?